How do we have a posture that's open to learning in the good and in the bad and in the ugly in between? Hi, my name's Coast and welcome to the PaperThin Place. And on this channel, we look at creativity, communication and culture. And sometimes we look at that through the lenses of diversity, leadership and art. So if those are things that you're interested in, press the subscribe button somewhere. So today I wanted to share with you kind of like three principles that kind of go together and roll together, but they're three principles that I try to take into my life generally in terms of being a creative person, but also in my life in terms of how I relate to new experiences or have conversations with other people. For a long while, I didn't realize that I actually did them. And that's partly because I guess for all of us, we carry some things instinctively and intuitively. But it took me a while to kind of almost like filter it through and boil it down to these three ideas. So hopefully these things will be something that help you understand yourself in creatively or how you relate to other people. So here we go. So thing one is openness. And what I mean by that is that actually, how can we have a default posture, a default kind of position where rather than being threatened by people, rather than feeling kind of this air of competition or needing to prove ourselves, actually our default position is, what can I learn right now? So what I mean by that is whenever I'm doing some work with people or partnering with people, whenever I'm meeting somebody socially that I've never met before, I always want to listen. I always want to have a sense that actually, is this conversation going to change me? Is this conversation going to bring me a new perspective or a new idea or a new empathy or sympathy or understanding that informs and adds to my world rather than subtract or fight against it? You know, I sometimes wonder if we were all in that position of being open to new ideas, what would our cities look like, our neighborhoods look like, our country and our discourse with each other? Would those things change? Would our social media be more friendly, more welcoming, more understanding? Something to think about, isn't it? So thing two is about creativity. And when I say creativity, I don't mean necessarily a specific art form or a specific media. I'm not necessarily saying let's talk about filmmaking or kind of, you know, graphic design or photography or music or whatever. I'm talking about creativity as something more profound, something that actually changes us as we engage with it. You know, one of the things that I think about when I think about creativity is that it's this inside out kind of idea. And that's because I think creativity at a base level is about learning. Yes, it is about making something and producing something or honing something, but really crucially and really essentially, I think it is more about how we are changing through that engagement and that creativity. How are we kind of being shaped into something new or molded into something new? Creativity isn't just a label that should be kind of like knocked around and held and lorded over other people. Creativity is this amazing idea that actually, as we engage with new perspectives or new ideas or new understandings, creativity changes us from the inside out. And ultimately, as creatives or creative people, however you want to frame that, we should always be learning. We should always be increasing our understanding of ourselves and that engagement. So the second thing that I think kind of as a part two of around this idea of creativity is the idea of sacrifice and cost. No great art, no great social justice movement, no great kind of invention was ever kind of, you know, it didn't arrive without some sort of engagement on a deep level from that musician or campaigner or that inventor. Actually, it cost them something. It was a process by which they engaged with this idea, with this kind of new frontier. And through that process, not only did they make something, but they were changed themselves as part of that. I think a lot of people get really hung up on the form, and I think there's kind of an insecurity there around needing to prove yourself sometimes. But actually, first and foremost, I think creativity is that profound changing of oneself, one's insight and perspectives and soul even. That is the primary kind of idea behind creativity. And the product is this thing that comes as a result of that. Thirdly, and finally, in that, once you've got this idea of openness, and openness being this kind of default posture of being able to learn from other people, you've then got kind of creativity, which is not just taking those ideas, but actually engaging with those ideas in a deeper way. So I guess I feel that generosity is something that's kind of part of human nature and part of how we relate to each other. Yet at the same time, we don't engage with it because we are fearful that we don't have enough for ourselves. We hold on to things rather than openly kind of share them. And I think what's really important about that idea of generosity is that it kind of completes the circle back round again. You know, for me, I've been the recipient and receiver of lots of generosity in my life, through my family, through my friends, through my communities, through my workplaces. People have given of themselves and given their time and resources and even money to help me in my kind of walk, in my next step or my kind of vision. And I think what's lovely about that is that it kind of really encourages me to then pass on what I have to other people. And in that, again, I think it kind of completes that circle and back round to openness. And that's kind of like this domino effect in society or in cultures or in neighborhoods where we pass on what we've received from others and we engage with ideas as they change ourselves. You know, at the start we talked about openness and that kind of allowing ourselves to understand new ideas, but then actually engaging with ideas is really important, and that's the kind of creative process. But as we're changed in that, actually the next part for me seems to be this idea that we then give those ideas away or give away our learning and understanding to other people. And that brings us back round to other places, because at that point we might engage with others who are themselves open to new ideas and new perspectives, and then they engage with things, and then they engage with that kind of idea of generosity, and that passes things on. And to me, this idea seems to be a rolling idea of how we could do life better. Not better in a kind of way that sometimes is put out where we're competing with each other, but better in the sense that we're all learning and we're all supporting each other and all being as generous as we can. And do you know what? Sometimes we'll fail in that, we'll fall in that. Sometimes we'll get stuff wrong, but that is kind of, in a way, part and parcel of the creative process and life in itself. When I was at art college, my art teacher said something that stuck with me for my entire life. And it wasn't just about art, it was about, again, how to engage with things generally. And we were in a life drawing session, and I'd made a bad mark, or what I thought was a bad mark, and my instinct was to kind of get rid of it as quickly as possible. And my art teacher said to me that actually, if I got rid of it without understanding how I'd gone wrong, if I got rid of it and then just jumped back into it again, I was likely to do the same mistake again, because I hadn't engaged with it, because I hadn't learned from it. And I think that's a crucial idea for us as we engage in things. How do we have a posture that's open to learning in the good and in the bad and in the ugly in between? How do we have a posture that's open to understanding and new ideas, but then taking those things on board and engaging with them from a personal level, from a creative level. And then how do we then share what we've learned with other people to help them avoid mistakes, but also because we want to be part of a learning community and a learning culture where we are supporting each other and helping each other along. Hey, so I think I've talked for way too long, so I'm going to stop there. But if you like the sort of stuff, then let me know, drop a little comment in the bottom, and hopefully it's been time well spent and you've learned something new about openness, about creativity, and about generosity. Thanks very much, and see you next time. Be kind to each other and be nice. Bye. Hey, press the button. Butter? Press the button. The butter